At 9:45 on the morning of September 11th, the FAA gave an order that they had never given before: land every civilian plane in the United States. At the time, there were more than 4,500 planes still in the sky. Some were minutes from landing, others were crossing the country, and hundreds were still heading towards American airspace. Less than 3 hours later, nearly all of them were on the ground. But how do you actually empty the sky? You can't pull an airplane over onto a shoulder. Every aircraft has limited fuel. An airport can only accept so many unexpected diverts before they're mogged out, and blocking one section of airspace can have ramifications for thousands of flights all across the globe. Today, we're breaking down what really happens when airspace is shut down, from the first ground stop to the final aircraft landing, and why reopening the sky can be harder than closing it. We will use two events that pushed aviation systems to its limits: September 11th, 2001, and the Icelandic volcano eruption that canceled approximately 100,000 flights across Europe and the rest of the globe. And by the end, you'll understand why airspace shutdown is not just one simple switch. It is thousands of decisions happening at the same time. Talking about shutting down an entire airspace, we need to clear up one misconception. When the news says that airspace has been closed, that does not always mean that every single airplane has been banned from the sky. A restriction can cover something as small as one stadium, or one active wildfire, one airport, or one city. It can begin at the ground and end at a specific altitude. It can block one category of aircraft while allowing police, military, medical, and emergency operations to still continue. Or in the case of 9/11, it covers the entire country. Under Article 1 of the Chicago Convention, each country has complete and exclusive sovereignty over the airspace above its own territory. In plain English, a country generally decides who can enter its territorial airspace and under what conditions. ICAO creates international standards and coordination frameworks. But ICAO does not just have one big red button in Montreal somewhere that closes the entire world's airspace. The actual restriction is imposed by the country responsible for that sovereign airspace. Its aviation authorities and air navigation organizations then convert the decision into operational instructions. In the United States, those instructions can include ground stops, temporary flight restrictions, emergency air traffic rules, and changes distributed through NOTAMs, or official notice to airmen. The specific mechanism depends on the type of emergency, but the first operational move is always almost the same: stop the departures. If an airport or region can no longer accept traffic, air traffic managers can issue a ground stop. Aircraft affected by that stop must remain at their gates, on the ramp, or in another safe position on the ground. This may inconvenience passengers and may disrupt their schedules, but they are not burning fuel in the sky and becoming a liability. And every departure you stop is one fewer aircraft that controllers will later have to put into a holding pattern, divert, or land somewhere else. This is also the difference between closing an airport and closing airspace. Closing airspace can block the routes above the airport, around the airport, or hundreds of miles away from it. But stopping departures only prevents the problem from getting bigger. It does nothing about the airplanes that are already flying. Once a major restriction takes effect, controllers and airline dispatchers begin working through aircraft already inside or heading towards the affected area. Some flights can turn around, some can land at an alternate airport, or others can be rerouted around the restriction. An aircraft may enter a holding pattern temporarily, but a holding pattern is not a permanent solution. Every minute in a holding pattern consumes fuel. As fuel quantity decreases, the number of safe options that a pilot has in front of him to get the aircraft on the ground in a safe manner starts to decrease. The aircraft position matters. A flight 20 minutes from its destination creates a completely different problem than a flight that's halfway across the Atlantic. Dispatchers will begin recalculating fuel, weather, runway suitability, aircraft weight, legal requirements, and available airports. Controllers begin separating aircraft that may be converging on the same destinations that they were never expected to arrive at. The airport chosen for the diversion has to accept the aircraft to the best of its ability. The aircraft needs somewhere safe to park, the passengers need customs or immigration processing, the aircraft may need fuel, maintenance, stairs, buses, catering, baggage, handling, you name it. There's always crew considerations, as the crew may reach duty limit. The passengers may need hotel rooms that do not exist in a town. The airplane may be physically safe and on the ground while remaining operationally stranded, hundreds or thousands of miles from where the airline needed it. But even in a major shutdown, the sky may not be completely empty. Military missions, emergency flights, law enforcement operations, medical flights, or other specifically authorized aircraft may still be allowed to operate. The restriction determines who can enter. Nothing demonstrates the scale of this operation better than what happened over the United States September 11th. After the hijacked aircraft struck the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, officials didn't know if there were additional aircraft involved. Around 9:25 that morning, the FAA stopped civilian departures throughout the United States, a national ground stop. For the first time in American history, civilian aircraft across the country were being prevented from taking off, regardless of their intended destination. At approximately 9:45, the order changed. Every civil aircraft was instructed to land at the nearest suitable airport as quickly as possible. International flights heading towards the United States were diverted away from American airspace. Think about the scale of that instruction. Flights expecting to remain airborne for several more hours were suddenly told to land somewhere else. Controllers were sending airplanes into airports that were not planned to receive them. Airlines were about to have crews, passengers, aircraft scattered across an entire continent. The scale of what was accomplished by the controllers, dispatchers, and airmen is staggering, as an event like this had never occurred, and there was no playbook or checklist for them to run. According to testimony provided to the 9/11 Commission by former FAA Acting Deputy Administrator Monty Belger, 4,546 aircraft were safely landed. By 12:16 p.m., less than 3 hours after the landing order, American airspace was completely clear, except for military and essential traffic. That works out to approximately one aircraft landing every 2 seconds across the system. Not on one airport, not on one runway, across the entire country, and it happened without another aviation incident. But the shutdown did not stop at the American border. This is where the story becomes international. Along with their fuel, the weather, and their alternate suitability determined where they went. Canada began accepting large numbers of aircraft originally bound for the United States, what became known as Operation Yellow Ribbon. Some flights diverted into major Canadian cities. Others landed at airports in places such as Gander, Newfoundland, an airport that I've personally landed at. The airport absorbed 38 planes, almost doubling the population of the town. But landing the airplanes was only half the job. Once the immediate threat there was contained, officials had to answer another question. How do you restart an entire aviation system? Terminals had been evacuated and searched. Airports had to demonstrate that they could meet new security requirements. Airlines had to implement new procedures. Crews and aircraft were scattered across the continent. The United States allowed limited repositioning operations before qualifying U.S. air carriers began resuming service at 11 a.m. on September 13th. But that did not mean that the schedule instantly returned to normal. You cannot pause thousands of flights for 2 days and then press play. As we said before, the aircraft are in the wrong cities, the pilots and flight attendants have reached their duty limits, the passengers are stranded, maintenance schedules have been interrupted, some airports are ready to reopen while others are not. Closing the system can happen in minutes, but recovering from the closure can take days, weeks, or longer. And not every airspace shutdown is caused by a deliberate attack. Sometimes the threat is almost invisible. On April 14th, 2010, Iceland's volcano, I don't know how to say it, Eyjafjallajökull, entered an explosive phase beneath the glacial ice. And yes, I'm putting the spelling on the screen because there is absolutely no chance that I am going to be able to pronounce that by the end of this video. The eruption sent fine volcanic ash high into the atmosphere. Winds then carry that ash to some of the busiest aviation routes in Europe. To someone standing on the ground, volcanic ash might seem or look like ordinary smoke or even fine dust. To a jet engine, it's something completely different. Volcanic ash can reduce visibility, damage windscreens, erode aircraft surfaces, contaminate systems, and severely damage engine parts. Inside the extremely hot core of a turbine engine, parts of the ash can melt. The material can then cool and then form a glass-like deposits on the turbine and in the nacelles of components in the cooling passages. In a sufficiently serious encounter, The engine can lose thrust or fail. Pilots cannot simply depend on conventional onboard weather radar to give them a clean picture of an ash cloud. Weather radar is primarily designed to detect moisture. A dangerous ash cloud might not even appear on their screen, and then it would be too late for the crew to steer around. That is why avoiding ash contamination became so important. As forecasts showed ash spreading from Iceland, European countries began closing or restricting affected airspace. The result was not one European authority flipping a single switch. It was a series of national decisions inside a deeply interconnected international network, coordinated through European and international aviation systems. Airports in major cities fell quiet, flights were canceled across Europe and around the world, and aircraft did not need to fly directly over Iceland to be affected. If an aircraft cannot reach Europe, it cannot operate its next flight out of Europe. The passengers don't arrive, the replacement crew doesn't arrive, cargo doesn't arrive. The disruption propagates through the network. Eurocontrol later estimated that approximately 100,000 flights were canceled during April and May crisis, disrupting around 10 million passenger journeys. But here is what makes that example especially important. The aviation industry already knew that volcanic ash was dangerous. What it did not have was a universally established engine-safe concentration that created a simple line between safe and not safe. The conservative reaction was therefore a broad avoidance of the airspace forecast to contain ash. It also produced unprecedented disruption and an intense debate about whether some closures were broader than necessary. As the crisis continued, regulators, scientists, airlines, and engine manufacturers worked toward a more detailed system. Instead of treating every forecast trace of ash exactly the same, the response evolved towards a more defined contamination zones, revised forecasts, and operator-specific safety risk assessments. ICAO subsequently published guidance built around a safety risk management approach. Under that framework, operators assess the risk of flying in known or forecast volcanic ash conditions under the oversight of their national regulator. That does not mean volcanic ash became safe. It just means that the industry developed a more precise method for managing and mitigating the risk. That reveals something important about airspace shutdowns. They're almost never just an air traffic control decision. It involves governments, aviation regulators, weather agencies, security organizations, air navigation providers, airports, airlines, pilots, and dispatchers. During an eruption, they also involve volcanologists, meteorologists, and aircraft engine manufacturers. Each organization holds one part of the picture. So how does the sky open? First, the cause of the shutdown has to be removed, contained, or understood well enough that it can be managed. For security event, that might mean determining that the immediate threat has passed and introducing additional screening or operational requirements. For volcanic ash, it might mean updated satellite observations, new forecasts, revised contamination zones, and approved risk assessments. The authority responsible for restriction can then cancel it, modify it, or replace it with something less restrictive. So what happens when airspace is actually shut down? First, authorities define exactly what is restricted: the geographical area, the affected altitudes, the start and end times, and which aircraft, if any, are exempt. The departures are then stopped before they add more airplanes to the mess. Flights already in the air are either landed, diverted, put in holding, or rerouted. Nearby countries and airports absorb the displaced traffic. Once the danger passes, the network is restored carefully, because reopening the airspace is not the same as restoring the system. September 11th demonstrated that the United States could clear almost all civilian traffic from its airspace in less than 3 hours when the threat was immediate and unknown. The 2010 Icelandic eruption showed that a hazard does not have to attack an airplane or even be visible to disrupt aviation across the entire continent. Both events demonstrated the same principle. When aviation authorities close the sky, they are not trying to eliminate disruption. In fact, the opposite. They are accepting enormous disruption because the alternative risk is much worse and much more dangerous. The ND flight map is what makes the news. But the real story is the thousands of people, controllers, pilots, dispatchers, airport workers, regulators, emergency teams, and scientists who have to bring every aircraft safely back to the ground, and then somehow put the entire system back together. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please subscribe, because in the next video, we're going to look at another system that aviation, communication, financial networks, and military operations all depend on. What happens when GPS goes down?